Welcome to this bonus episode of our series in International Economic Law. In this episode, Dr. Yanis will take you through the totality of the key topics mentioned in these series. The presentation starts with a reflection on colonialism, decolonization, and the new international economic order. We then discuss national autonomy and the concept of permanent sovereignty over natural resources. Then we move on to consider the institutional framework of international economic law, focusing on the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. Our presentation would not be complete without an investigation of the regulation of foreign investment and the role of multinational corporations in relation to human rights and labor standards. We finish with a presentation of the World Trade Organization and the history of international trade and its social, economic, and environmental impacts.
Let's dive into this fascinating journey of how economic relations and laws have evolved over time. Imagine a world in ancient times where the main role of the law was to keep order and help settle disputes. As societies grew and became more complex, the law took on an even bigger role, promoting justice and prosperity. With advances in science and technology, people started exploring and trading with far-off lands, setting the stage for what we now call globalization. Fast forward to the era of empires and modern nation-states. The Peace of Westphalia in 1648 was a game-changer. It marked the end of vast empires like the Holy Roman Empire and the rise of sovereign nations in Europe. These new states were eager to explore the world, seeking wealth and opportunities beyond their borders. This exploration and colonization led to significant changes in international economic relations, with European powers exploiting colonies for resources and economic gain. The mid-20th century brought about a wave of decolonization in Asia and Africa. Newly independent states emerged, determined to assert their economic independence and development. They challenged the existing economic order, advocating for principles like permanent sovereignty over their natural resources. These nations aimed to restructure international economic relations to achieve economic equality and justice, leading to significant developments in international economic law. In the post-World War II era, international economic activities expanded rapidly, necessitating legal regulations. Initially, the focus was on economic development, but soon the idea of sustainable development took center stage. This concept emphasized balancing economic growth with the conservation of natural resources, ensuring that progress didn't come at the expense of the environment. As we moved into the 1960s and 1970s, developing countries, particularly those newly independent from colonial rule, began to assert themselves on the global stage. They called for a new international economic order, or a NEO, to address economic inequalities and establish fairer economic relations. Their efforts were pivotal in shaping international economic law, which had to evolve to meet these new demands and challenges. The late 20th century was a period of significant transformation in international economic relations, marked by globalization and the rise of multinational corporations. This era necessitated further evolution in international economic law to address the growing influence and power of these corporations. However, this period also saw a growing opposition to capitalism. Critics pointed out issues like economic inequality, environmental degradation, and labor exploitation, pushing for regulations that promote social and economic justice. As we entered the 21st century, the quest for a balanced international economic system gained momentum. Efforts were made to address the interests of both developed and developing countries. Key issues included trade liberalization, investment regulation, labor rights, and environmental protection. The recognition of the need for sustainable development became a driving force, influencing policies and regulations on the global stage. So, in essence, the story of international economic law is one of constant evolution and adaptation. It reflects the ongoing efforts to balance economic growth with social justice and environmental sustainability. From the early days of maintaining order in ancient societies to the complex global economic relations of today, international economic law continues to shape and be shaped by the ever-changing landscape of global interactions. Let's explore now the foundational principles and the institutional framework of international economic law. These chapters are crucial for understanding how economic interactions between nations are governed and the role that various international institutions play in this process. Starting with the fundamentals, international economic law is essentially about regulating economic relations among nations. It's a broad field that includes everything from public international law of trade to international commercial law and finance. Imagine it as a vast web of rules and agreements that help maintain a balanced and fair global economic order. One of the core principles in this field is economic sovereignty. This means that each state has the right to manage its economic affairs without external interference. This principle was notably reinforced by the concept of permanent sovereignty over natural resources, PSNR, which emerged in the mid-20th century. PSNR asserts that nations have the right to control and use their natural resources in accordance with their national interests, which was a significant step for many newly independent states post-decolonisation. But as the world started paying more attention to environmental issues, international economic law began to incorporate these concerns. The idea of sustainable development became prominent, emphasizing that economic growth should not come at the expense of the environment. This shift was marked by various international agreements and declarations, like the Rio Declaration of 1992, which introduced concepts such as intergenerational equity and common but differentiated responsibilities. Essentially, it called for developed and developing nations to work together towards sustainable development, acknowledging that while all countries should contribute, they do so in proportion to their capabilities and responsibilities. Moving on to the institutional structure, let's talk about the Bretton Woods institutions established after World War II. The World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and initially the planned International Trade Organization, ITO, which was later replaced by the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT, and eventually the World Trade Organization, WTO. These institutions were designed to help maintain global economic stability and promote development. The World Bank focuses on financing development projects, especially in poorer countries, to help them achieve economic growth and reduce poverty. The IMF, on the other hand, works to ensure monetary stability by providing temporary financial assistance to countries facing balance of payments problems. It also plays a significant role in monitoring global financial developments and offering policy advice. The WTO, which evolved from GATT, oversees international trade rules. It aims to ensure that trade flows as smoothly, predictably, and freely as possible. This involves negotiating and implementing new trade agreements and resolving disputes between member countries. The WTO's role is particularly crucial in creating a level playing field for all nations, ensuring that trade policies are transparent and non-discriminatory. These institutions, together with the United Nations and its various specialized agencies, form the backbone of international economic law. The UN General Assembly has been instrumental in adopting key resolutions and declarations that shape economic relations between states. Noteworthy documents include the Declaration on the Permanent Sovereignty of States over their Natural Resources and the Charter of Economic Rights and Duties of States. These documents outline the rights and responsibilities of states in managing their economic affairs and interacting with other nations. In summary, understanding international economic law involves appreciating its principles like economic sovereignty and sustainable development, and recognizing the pivotal roles played by global institutions like the World Bank, IMF, and WTO. These principles and institutions work together to foster a fair, stable, and sustainable global economic order, addressing the diverse needs and challenges of both developed and developing nations. Let's dive into an exploration of the law and practice of the World Bank Group. This information can serve as an overview of the World Bank's evolution, structure, and its pivotal role in global development. The World Bank Group, established towards the end of World War II at the Bretton Woods Conference in New Hampshire, was initially designed to help rebuild countries devastated by the war. However, its role has significantly evolved over the years. Today, its primary objective is to reduce global poverty and support development in low-income countries. The World Bank Group is composed of 5 closely associated institutions: the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, IBRD, the International Development Association, IDA, the International Finance Corporation, IFC, the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, MIGA, and the International Center for Settlement of Investment Disputes, ICSID. Each of these institutions has specific aims and objectives, but collectively they work towards providing financial and technical assistance to developing countries. Over the decades, the World Bank has transformed its focus and strategies. In the 1960s, with post-war reconstruction nearly completed, the bank shifted its attention to newly independent developing countries. However, by the 1970s, it faced criticism for its lending practices, which were often compared to commercial lending, leading to issues of corruption and mismanagement in recipient countries. This criticism led to the adoption of a policy of conditionality, requiring borrower countries to implement economic reforms as a prerequisite for receiving loans. During the 1980s, the World Bank encountered challenges related to macroeconomic and debt rescheduling issues. Consequently, it began to incorporate social and environmental scrutiny into its lending practices. By the end of the 1980s, the bank had established an inspection panel to investigate claims against it, responding to increasing criticism from civil society. Today, the World Bank plays a significant role in the global policy arena. It assists countries affected by various crises, both political and economic, and supports reconstruction efforts after natural and man-made disasters. The bank's position as a major source of development assistance is well established, and it is expected to see its annual lending capacity rise to $100 billion by 2030, aiming to promote opportunity and provide services to the poor in developing countries worldwide. The World Bank provides a range of financial products, including low-interest loans, interest-free credit, and grants. These are particularly aimed at developing countries to help them provide basic services and address challenges like the HIV/AIDS epidemic. For instance, the International Development Association, IDA, offers interest-free credit and grant financing to low-income countries, funded by contributions from approximately 40 rich countries. The World Bank Group has set ambitious goals for 2030, ending extreme poverty by reducing the percentage of people living on less than $1.90 a day to no more than 3%, and promoting shared prosperity by fostering income growth for the bottom 40% in every country. In response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the World Bank has provided exceptional support to help countries address the unprecedented threats posed by the crisis, focusing on saving lives, protecting the vulnerable, and supporting economic recovery. The governance structure of the World Bank is unique. It operates as a cooperative with its 189 member countries as shareholders. The number of shares allocated to each member depends on the size of its economy, with the United States being the largest shareholder, followed by Japan, Germany, the United Kingdom, and France. Unlike the UN or WTO, the World Bank uses a weighted voting system based on these contributions, giving significant influence to leading developed countries. The bank's activities are regulated by its Articles of Agreement concluded at the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944. These articles outline the purposes and parameters of the bank's operations, including assisting in the reconstruction and development of member territories, promoting private foreign investment, and facilitating the balanced growth of international trade. In recent years, the World Bank has faced criticism for its involvement in areas not originally mandated by its member states and for the conditionality of its loans. Despite this, it remains a major contributor to development efforts, continuously adapting to meet new global challenges and striving to remain relevant in the changing economic landscape. In conclusion, the World Bank Group has undergone significant transformation since its inception, evolving from a post-war reconstruction agency to a pivotal player in global development. Its efforts to reduce poverty, support sustainable growth, and address global crises highlight its critical role in the international community's efforts to achieve developmental goals. We will now explore the law and practice of the International Monetary Fund, IMF. Established towards the end of World War II at the Bretton Woods Conference in New Hampshire, the IMF's primary aim was to ensure global monetary stability. Today, its focus has expanded significantly, with one of its main objectives being the reduction of global poverty. The IMF plays a crucial role in contributing to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, agreed upon in 2015 as successors to the Millennium Development Goals. The IMF is composed of 190 member countries. According to Article 1 of its Articles of Agreement, the IMF was established to promote international monetary cooperation, facilitate the expansion and balanced growth of international trade, promote exchange stability, assist in the establishment of a multilateral system of payments, and make its resources available to members experiencing balance of payments difficulties. These foundational goals guide the IMF's operations and policy decisions. A key aspect of the IMF's role is its involvement in the internal economic policies of its member countries more directly than institutions like the World Bank. Article 4 of the IMF's Articles of Agreement outlines the duties and obligations of member countries, which are designed to bring more discipline to the international monetary and financial system. These obligations include maintaining orderly exchange arrangements and promoting stable exchange rates. The governance of the IMF is unique. Its highest policy-making body is the Board of Governors, which includes one governor from each member country. The day-to-day operations are overseen by a 24-member executive board located in Washington, D.C. The managing director, appointed by the executive board, functions as the head of IMF staff and chairs the executive board. The IMF's resources come from its member countries, primarily through quota payments, which reflect each country's economic size. These quotas are crucial as they determine a country's subscription payments, the amount of financing it can receive, and its share in special drawing rights (SDR) allocations. For instance, the United States, being the world's largest economy, is the biggest contributor to the IMF. In its efforts to ensure global economic stability, the IMF engages in several key activities. The IMF conducts regular appraisals of its members' economic situations and provides policy advice aimed at promoting economic stability and growth. This involves monitoring and assessing global economic trends and offering recommendations to member countries. The fund offers technical assistance and training to help member countries strengthen their capacity to design and implement effective economic policies. This assistance covers areas such as fiscal policy, monetary and exchange rate policies, banking and financial system supervision, and statistics. In terms of financial assistance and lending, the IMF provides financial support to member countries facing balance of payments problems. This support includes standby arrangements for short-term issues and extended arrangements for medium-term structural problems. Additionally, the IMF offers concessional lending to its poorest members to help them achieve sustainable economic growth and improved living standards. The IMF has also played a significant role in responding to financial crises. For instance, it was involved in the financial crisis in Portugal, Greece, and Ireland, where it helped forge rescue packages. These interventions, however, have often been accompanied by criticisms regarding the austerity measures imposed as part of the conditionality attached to the assistance. A reform of the IMF has been an ongoing process. At the 2006 IMF World Bank annual meetings, a resolution was approved to reform the representation of members to better reflect the global economy and enhance the participation of low-income countries. These reforms aim to make the IMF more representative and effective in addressing the challenges of a changing global economic landscape. In conclusion, the IMF's role in the global economy is multifaceted and evolving. It functions as a key player in promoting international monetary cooperation, ensuring economic stability, and providing financial assistance to member countries. Through its various activities and reforms, the IMF continues to adapt to the needs of the global economy, striving to support sustainable development and reduce poverty worldwide. A crucial topic for understanding the frameworks and challenges in managing international economic activities. We explore the evolution, current practices, and the necessity of regulating foreign investment to balance the interests of host countries, investors, and the global economy. Foreign investment law is one of the oldest and most complex areas of international law, primarily developed through bilateral transactions and diplomatic exchanges. Despite the complexities, it remains one of the few major areas of international law not yet governed by a comprehensive international treaty. The United Nations, UN, has made several attempts to regulate foreign investment, but there is no single international instrument outlining the main principles of this law. the role of the UN has been significant in trying to establish a regulatory framework. For instance, the UN General Assembly has adopted resolutions like the 1962 Resolution on the Permanent Sovereignty of States over their natural resources and wealth and the 1974 Charter of Economic Rights and Duties of States. These documents highlight the importance of sovereignty and equitable economic relations, but they do not provide a detailed regulatory framework for foreign investment. In the 1970s and 1980s, during the push for a new international economic order, NEO, there were efforts to adopt a comprehensive code of conduct for multinational enterprises, MNEs, under the UN Commission on Transnational Corporations, CTC. However, with the political changes of the late 20th century and the rise of capitalism, these efforts were abandoned and the CTC was disbanded in the early 1990s. The 1990s marked the peak of capitalism and the expansion of MNEs, with institutions like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, IMF, promoting the idea of restricting sovereign states' powers to regulate foreign investment. This era saw the transformation of the law of foreign investment into the law of foreign investment protection, focusing more on protecting investors' rights than regulating their activities. Examples include the 1992 World Bank Guidelines on the Treatment of Foreign Direct Investment and the OECD's draft Multilateral Agreement on Investment, OMI. However, the late 1990s witnessed a backlash against unchecked capitalism. Public protests led to the abandonment of the WTO meeting in Seattle in 1999 and the OECD's draft ME. These events highlighted the need to address concerns about corporate power, environmental protection, and human rights. Today, MNEs are the primary vehicles of foreign investment. They operate with considerable freedom, raising the question of whether and how their activities should be regulated. Developed countries generally benefit from the expansion of MNEs, while developing countries face pressure to adopt market economy principles. This situation creates a dilemma. Who should regulate MNEs and how? The COVID-19 pandemic has significantly impacted foreign direct investment, FDI flows, highlighting the need for robust regulation. In 2020, global FDI fell by 42%, emphasizing the vulnerability of investment flows to global crises. There is a growing consensus on the need to regulate MNEs. Critics argue that unregulated corporate activities can undermine societal values, environmental protection, and national interests. The difficulty in regulating MNEs stems from jurisdictional barriers and the complex nature of international law. Self-regulation has been proposed as a solution, with arguments that companies, host states, and civil societies working together can promote human rights and sustainable development. Corporate social responsibility, CSR, has gained traction, with businesses expected to operate responsibly and accountably. The UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, established by John Ruggie, provide a framework for MNEs to follow, emphasizing the protect, respect, and remedy approach. The idea of regulating MNEs through international law remains appealing but challenging. International law depends on the consent of states, making it difficult to enforce. Critics argue that international rules often favor powerful states, but there is evidence that regulatory mechanisms can be effective. Bilateral investment treaties, BITs, have traditionally regulated foreign investment, supplemented by the case law of international courts and tribunals and specific treaties like the International Convention for the Settlement of Investment Disputes, ICSID. However, the proliferation of BITs has led to confusion and imbalance, with developed countries often imposing their standards on developing countries. The 1990s saw a golden age for foreign investors, with international financial institutions providing strong protection for investors. However, recent trends show a shift away from the investor-state dispute settlement (ISDS) mechanisms embedded in BITs. Many states are now rejecting these treaties and seeking alternatives, reflecting a growing dissatisfaction with the current system. In conclusion, while there have been various efforts to regulate foreign investment, there is still no comprehensive legal instrument to govern it. The approach to regulation has been piecemeal, with bilateral and multilateral instruments addressing specific aspects of investment protection. The evolving landscape of international economic law continues to reflect the tensions between promoting foreign investment and ensuring it aligns with broader societal and environmental goals. In this video, we are focusing on the crucial topic of regulating foreign investment, addressing the concept of corporate responsibility and the human rights obligations of multinational enterprises, MNEs. The international community has grown increasingly concerned about whether MNEs should adhere to human rights principles in their business operations. Key questions arise about the human rights obligations of MNEs, their accountability for violations, and the legal mechanisms required to enforce these responsibilities. Corporate social responsibility, CSR, is at a crossroads, with recent developments pushing the boundaries of traditional distinctions between public and private sectors. There are strong arguments in favor of making MNEs directly responsible for human rights violations. Efforts to hold MNEs accountable have included various legal doctrines and principles from different legal regimes, highlighting the absence of a cohesive body of law regulating MNE activities and underscoring the need for international regulation. Advocates for a global charter of corporate responsibility argue that such a framework would benefit MNEs by providing legal certainty. Responsible MNEs recognize that internationally agreed rules on human rights and environmental standards would facilitate their operations worldwide, outweighing compliance costs. Despite these potential benefits, MNEs have faced numerous allegations of human rights violations, including exploiting child labor, paying extremely low wages, ignoring health and safety standards, and interfering in host state affairs. Documented cases show MNEs paying poverty-level wages in countries like Bangladesh and Cambodia, often subjecting workers to hazardous conditions without adequate protections. Various International Labour Organization (ILO) treaties provide for basic workers' rights, such as the freedom to bargain collectively, elimination of workplace discrimination, and adequate wages. However, the implementation of these treaties through national laws is often weak. Many governments are either unwilling or unable to impose international standards on companies operating within their jurisdictions. The Global Compact Initiative by former UN Secretary-General Kofi Annan and the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, aim to engage businesses in promoting human rights and sustainable development. However, there has been resistance from the corporate sector against adopting a binding global charter. Critics argue that existing self-regulatory codes are insufficient and a comprehensive set of international rules is necessary to hold MNEs accountable. This brings us to the obligations of MNEs to protect human rights from both national and international perspectives. The International Human Rights Agenda has two main objectives: protecting individual rights against abuses by powerful entities and encouraging respect for human rights by states and other actors. Over the past few decades, human rights have increasingly become enforceable legal rights rather than mere aspirations. MNEs, due to their economic and social power, have a significant impact on human rights. Traditional views held that only states were subjects of international law and human rights obligations could only be attributed to governments. However, this perspective has shifted, recognizing that MNEs also have responsibilities towards human rights. Efforts to hold MNEs accountable include lifting the corporate veil to make parent companies liable for their subsidiaries' actions abroad. Cases like the Amoco Cadiz oil spill and Lube v. Cape Pelk demonstrate that courts have sometimes pierced the corporate veil to ensure justice. However, there are strong precedents against this, and the legal landscape remains complex. The UN has played a crucial role in advancing business and human rights. The UN Human Rights Council endorsed the Protect, Respect and Remedy framework, which outlines states' duties to protect human rights, corporate responsibilities to respect human rights, and the need for effective remedies. Although not legally binding, these guiding principles have become an authoritative reference point. In June 2014, the UN Human Rights Council adopted a resolution to start developing an international legally binding instrument to regulate the activities of transnational corporations with respect to human rights. This resolution marked a significant step towards holding MNEs accountable on a global scale. Despite these advancements, challenges remain in effectively regulating MNEs. The power of MNEs often allows them to evade local laws, and a comprehensive international code of conduct is still needed. The revised OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises and efforts by various international bodies underscore the importance of a collective approach to ensuring MNEs respect human rights in all their operations. In summary, the evolving understanding and regulation of corporate responsibility and human rights in the context of multinational enterprises highlight the ongoing push for a global regulatory framework. This effort is driven by the need to balance economic activities with respect for human rights and sustainable development, ensuring that MNEs operate responsibly and accountably in a globalized world. The World Trade Organization, WTO, is the only global international organization dealing with the rules of trade between nations, aimed at ensuring that trade flows as smoothly, predictably, and freely as possible. It encourages the gradual dismantling of trade barriers like tariffs and duties and works towards converging standards through international negotiations. This provides legal certainty to producers and exporters that foreign markets will remain open to them, promoting a more prosperous, peaceful, and accountable economic world. One of the main functions of the WTO is to provide a mechanism for the settlement of trade disputes, reducing the risk of disputes spilling over into political or military conflicts. This mechanism ensures that the trade regime remains orderly, civilized, and peaceful, contributing to the idea of a global village. The WTO seeks to liberalize trade by lowering trade barriers, with its structure designed to break down barriers between people and nations over time. At the heart of the international trading system led by the WTO, known as the multilateral trading system, are the WTO agreements negotiated and ratified by most of the world's trading nations. These agreements provide the ground rules for international trade and commerce. Essentially, they are contracts between nations ensuring that trade is as fair and free as practical. They guarantee member countries important trade rights and impose norms and disciplines that require governments worldwide to keep their trade policies within agreed limits, benefiting everyone. These agreements help producers of goods and services, traders, exporters, and importers conduct their business orderly and protect the rights of creators, authors, and innovators to their intellectual property. The present set of WTO rules result from negotiations between members from 1986 to 1994 under the Uruguay Round negotiations, including a major revision of the original General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT, adopted in 1947. The revised GATT 1994 is now the WTO's principal rule book for trade in goods. The Uruguay Round also concluded new agreements for dealing with the trade in services, relevant aspects of intellectual property, dispute settlement, and trade policy reviews. These agreements consist of about 60 agreements and separate commitments, called schedules, made by individual members in specific areas, such as lowering customs duty rates and opening up the market in services. Through these agreements, WTO members operate a non-discriminatory trading system that spells out their rights and obligations based on key principles like most favored nation, MFN treatment, and national treatment, including non-discrimination. This means each WTO member gets guarantees that its exports will be treated fairly and consistently in other countries' markets in return for providing the same assurances to imports from other WTO members into its own market. There are some narrowly defined exceptions to these rules in favor of developing countries, allowing flexibility in implementing their commitments. The principal pillars of GATT-WTO law aim to liberalize international trade through the principles of most favored nation treatment, national treatment, reciprocity, and non-discrimination. Most favored nation treatment means a state receives the same concessions and privileges on international trade matters from another state as those provided to a third state. This principle is reciprocal and can be part of bilateral or multilateral treaties. The national treatment principle ensures that a state party to GATT accords the same treatment to the products of other states parties as it accords to its own nationals' products. The institutional structure of the WTO includes the Ministerial Conference, the highest decision-making body composed of representatives of all members, meeting at least once every 2 years. It carries out the functions of the WTO and takes necessary actions. Under the Ministerial Conference is the General Council, which convenes to discharge the responsibilities of the Dispute Settlement Body and the Trade Policy Review Body. There are 3 other councils under the General Council overseeing the implementation of international trade agreements within their purview: the Council for Trade in Goods, the Council for Trade in Services, and the Council for TRIPS. The Ministerial Conference has also established committees on trade and development, balance of payments restrictions, and budget, finance, and administration. These councils and committees carry out functions assigned by various trade agreements, periodically reviewing special provisions in favor of least developed country members and reporting appropriate actions to the General Council. The WTO agreements cover main areas such as trade in goods, where the desire to liberalize trade was the main reason for the conclusion of GATT-GIEM in 1947. GATT was the forum for negotiating lower customs duty rates and other barriers for trade in goods, outlining important rules like non-discrimination based on MFN and national treatment principles. The updated GATT, since the establishment of the WTO in 1995, has become the WTO's umbrella agreement for trade in goods, prescribing rules designed to control trade distortion issues like anti-dumping duties, subsidies, emergency action on imports, and general exceptions. The liberalization of trade in services was added to the international agenda during the Uruguay round. The General Agreement on Trade in Services, GATS, allows various service providers to aspire to freer and fairer trade principles originally applied only to goods. GATS comprises 3 pillars: the main framework agreement with basic obligations for all member countries, national schedules of commitments, and annexes addressing individual services sectors. It defines the nature and scope of liberalization for 4 types of services, sets out general obligations based on MFN and national treatment, contains provisions on market access and national treatment, and establishes the basis for progressive liberalization through successive negotiations. The agreement also includes provisions concerning institutional mechanisms for consultation, dispute settlement, and the establishment of a Council on Trade in Services. The WTO's dispute settlement mechanism, a significant outcome of the Uruguay round, is vital for enforcing trade rules and ensuring smooth trade flows. This mechanism includes a stage-by-stage procedure for resolving disputes, with possibilities for panel rulings and appeals on legal grounds. The Dispute Settlement Body, DSB, administers these rules and procedures, establishing panels, adopting reports, maintaining surveillance of implementation, and authorizing suspension of concessions or obligations under covered agreements. The system encourages countries to settle differences through consultation, aiming for positive solutions and mutually acceptable agreements. While the DSB has faced significant challenges over the last few years, its function remains key to ensuring the seamless operation of international trade. The concept of free trade has a long and evolving history, beginning with early human civilizations where trade was conducted through barter systems and later through monetary exchanges. The essence of trade lies in its voluntary and reciprocal nature. One person gives something to another in exchange for something else. As trade grew both in volume and geographical scope, regulations were introduced to ensure fairness and to prevent distortions. Throughout history, trade has been a central activity in the development of human civilization, contributing significantly to wealth creation. Traders and trading nations have consistently sought to minimize interference in their activities. States, on the other hand, have historically competed to maximize their own trade advantages while often seeking to regulate the trade of others. This competitive dynamic has shaped much of international trade policy over the centuries. The modern concept of free trade is deeply rooted in the principle of laissez-faire, which advocates for minimal government intervention in the economic activities of individuals. This idea suggests that trade, primarily an activity between individuals, should be free from government interference. The justification for international trade is encapsulated in the concept of comparative advantage, which posits that nations should specialize in producing goods and services they can create efficiently and trade for what they are less efficient at producing domestically. Early regulations aimed at facilitating trade established the Code of Conduct for international trade participants, known in private international law as Lex Mercatoria. For a long period, international trade was seen as a commercial activity conducted by private parties, with little involvement from public international law. It wasn't until after the First World War that states began to protect their domestic markets through interventionist measures, marking the decline of laissez-faire and the rise of protectionism. The period between the two world wars was marked by economic depression, high inflation, and significant distortions in international trade due to heavy regulation. One of the major long-term causes of the Second World War was the economic chaos resulting from these protectionist measures. In response, efforts during and after the Second World War aimed to create a world economic order incorporating laissez-faire principles and promoting global economic and political liberalization. This new strategy led to the liberalization of international trade, with key agreements concluded at the Bretton Woods Conference in New Hampshire. These agreements heralded a new era in international economic relations, where the regulation of international trade became a central focus of public international law. The vision for a new world order, conceived towards the end of the Second World War, had four main components: the establishment of a new international political order through the United Nations, the creation of an international monetary system through the International Monetary Fund, IMF, the development and reconstruction of war-devastated states through the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, IBRD, and the liberalization of international trade through the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT. GATT, designed to regulate the liberalization of trade, was seen as a temporary measure until the establishment of a more comprehensive international trade organization, ITO. However, the ITO Charter failed to gain ratification, particularly from the United States, which was only willing to accept the liberalization of trade without the elements of international economic justice. The result was that GATT became the primary mechanism for promoting capitalism through the liberalization of trade. This era of global trade liberalization significantly accelerated globalization within a capitalist framework. The 1990s were marked by a triumph of market-based solutions to underdevelopment, with many developing countries embarking on the road to liberalization and accepting the outcomes of the Uruguay round of trade negotiations, as well as the prescriptions of the WTO, World Bank, and IMF. However, the 1990s also symbolized a new phase of resistance. Alongside the globalization of capital, goods, services, and capitalist ideas, there was a parallel globalization of alternative ideas. Non-governmental organizations, NGOs, emerged to challenge the notion that unfettered capitalism was the only path to prosperity. This resistance emphasized the protection and preservation of the environment, the promotion of human rights, the alleviation of poverty, and the pursuit of international economic and social justice. Any discussion on international economic law would be incomplete if it did not examine the intersection between economic development and environmental concerns. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, illustrate the evolution of international economic law towards incorporating sustainability. Economic development and trade activities have significant environmental impacts, which are increasingly important in the context of climate change. Traditional economic literature often views these impacts through a market-based lens, focusing on externalities, unintended side effects of economic activities on others. This perspective assumes that markets are the primary drivers of growth and that regulation should only step in to address market failures. The environmental movement, spurred by publications like Rachel Carson's Silent Spring and The Limits to Growth by Meadows, has shifted the focus towards sustainable development. The SDGs, adopted in 2015, call for a global partnership to address poverty, improve health and education, reduce inequality, and tackle climate change. These goals emphasize the importance of sustainable practices in multinational supply chains and highlight the role of research and technology in achieving these objectives. In conclusion, the evolution of international economic law reflects the ongoing tension between promoting free trade and ensuring sustainable development. The challenge remains to balance economic growth with environmental protection, recognizing that both are essential for long-term global prosperity.
Thank you for listening to this bonus episode of our International Economic Law series. You can find the other episodes on Spotify. Look out for the blue thumbnails for these series. If you would like to know more about how this podcast episode was prepared, Get in touch with Dr. Yanis. See you next time.